Right now, it is time for Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven. Arthur joins us on a Monday morning, and of course, on the web at robinhoodradio.com. Click on demand, Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven. And before I welcome in Arthur, I want to apologize to his listeners. His listeners are some of the most loyal listeners I've ever seen in my life. And when Arthur's not on, especially for 2 weeks when I was sick, I got a lot of different emails and text messages, and I responded to all of them, letting them know it wasn't Arthur, it was me. I'm the engineer. And every one of them that wrote in to complain that they couldn't hear Arthur and they wanted to make sure Arthur was all right, every one of them wrote me back a wish to feel better. So you have some of the best.
Yes.
You have some of the best.
I want you to feel better.
You have some of the best listeners in the world, Arthur.
Thank you, and thank you, listeners. Thank you for being actually very observant, because I know how good Marshall is at making it sound like we're all live even when we're not. So, anyway, we have in my building, I live in an apartment house, and in the basement where we all go to put our various recyclables, as well as do other things, the laundry is down there. We have a swap table. And people put on the table things they don't want anymore, but they know is still valuable to somebody. You know, the old line, somebody's trash is somebody else's treasure. And I always look at the table because I'm a real flea market type guy. And I find really good things, and I put really good things down. But the other day, and people dispose of a lot of cookbooks in my building. So that means that people aren't cooking. I don't know what that means. But the other day, there was a book on the table that had such an enticing look to it. I had no idea what it was about, but that I brought it upstairs. I said, if it's a piece of trash, I'll bring it back down. It's called The Blue Zone's Kitchen. This particular one is The Blue Zone's Kitchen. Have you heard of the Blue Zones, Marshall?
No, I haven't.
The Blue Zones are 5 communities, I'll call them, in the world that have the longest living people. And these communities are the Nicoyan Peninsula of Costa Rica, the central mountains, hills, really, they're not such big mountains, of Sardinia, Icaria, which is an island, a Greek island. I'm counting on my fingers here what's left. Okinawa, and so they're all over the world. And in Loma Linda, California, is a community of Seventh-day Adventists that live minimum 10 years longer than their peers who are not Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. So in that case, we could. Well, let me just say no. I take back what I was just about to say and didn't say. It's more than food. In every one of these communities, food plays a very important role in their longevity, but it's way more than the actual food. But it's a whole list of things. And this book, was written by Dan Buettner with photographs by David McLean. I have to say that David McLean's photographs captured me before I started even reading the book, which is why I picked it up off the swap table, because it's not just good photography, really great photography, but it's one of those new style books where there's no dust jacket. The cover, the hard cover itself, is a photograph, is the cover, and I would say that the inside photographs all had that sort of muted, it just happened this second look. There are a lot of styled photographs in the book, which is typical of most cookbooks these days, but also a good measure of people photographs. This man really captured life and lifestyles in these communities. I'm looking right now at a picture of an old lady, Okinawan, with her food in front of her, including her miso soup, of course. Anyway, what's interesting to me, well, there are many things that are interesting to me. This book totally captured me, Marshall, and only when I started reading it carefully did I realize that it's propaganda for the vegan diet. because I'm thinking, nobody in Sardinia, I know, of all these places, the only one that I really know anything about is Sardinia, where I've been a few times too. And I understand that in the mountains, the life is going to be very different than what most tourists see when they go to Sardinia, tourists like me. On the east coast of Sardinia is beaches and condos for super rich people. I don't know who's there now, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were some Russian oligarchs and Arab oil people. On the other coast is very interesting towns that are more real and have a lot of history because the native people of Sardinia, the Nuraghi, were mostly on that coast. Anyway, so the Sardinian food interested me, of course, and the Greek food interested me, of course. I'm not going to cook Seventh-day Adventist food because I have to say that even though it is vegetarian, and in when you read a recipe or you see a title of a recipe, I should say, you say, "Oh, I might like that." No, it's full of American convenience products, and I have to have a footnote here: powdered garlic and powdered onion. Thank you. But they're so ubiquitous these days, it's sort of hard to escape them. I watch these barbecue shows, and I don't want to eat. And now that I see what they put on it, I don't really want to eat it because it's just full of these, powders. And they're all pretty much the same. It's what I used to call, because I was a fraternity house cook, fraternity house cooking, which was add every spice that was on the shelf and an herb that was on the shelf. This, by the way, is interesting. The blue zones have a number of things in common. By the way, it's called blue zones because Dan Buettner, the author of this particular Blue Zones book, but he has worked with anthropologists and physiologists, scientists, to figure out first which were the most long-lived communities. And when they found these communities around the world through data, they circled them with a blue pencil, so they became known to each other as the blue zones. And these 5 are featured in this cookbook with recipes from each zone: Sardinia, Okinawa, Nicoya, Ikaria, and Loma Linda. Any case, what's one of the food interesting things is that Dan Buettner says that basically, except with some local product variation, all these cuisines use the same 20 ingredients. And as I said, this book is proselytizing for veganism. So if you read it carefully, you'll see that he has selected the recipes to be vegan. But of course, I think I started to say a few minutes ago and got lost. If you're living in the hills of Sardinia, you're not living without sheep's milk cheese. I've been to Sardinia. There is sheep everywhere. It's one of the things that is just part of your diet. And in fact, you eat sheep meat as well. And in all these places, except for the Seventh-day Adventists who are strict vegetarians, they do eat small amounts of meat. They do eat some dairy, some cheese. They might eat eggs. They might very well eat eggs. But this is, if you're familiar with it, an extension of the Mediterranean diet, which became very well known in the United States, I would say in the 1980s. At that time, the man who created the term Mediterranean diet, Ansel Keys, was still alive. He died at age 100 because he observed in his life what healthy people ate, and he was a healthy guy. And with his wife, Margaret, they wrote a book called The Benevolent Bean. I'd forgotten about this book entirely, although I knew I had it. Ends up I have a first edition, too, 1967. in excellent condition, which I see on the internet goes for a lot of money because Ansel Keys is super famous. So Ansel Keys did his observation of food just south of where I had my cooking school for all those years. And so I'm very familiar with the diet of people down there. This is the south of Italy. Ansel and his wife Margaret actually lived for almost 40 years in a town just south of Cecilia's farm. And he saw that besides that these people lived to be very old, that they were eating, for instance, more olive oil than other people around them who were still really eating pork fat, mainly in their diet. Whereas the people in Achaia, in this little area just south of Naples and Salerno, at one time Greek, in ancient times Greek, Magna Graecia, Greater Greece, they have olive trees planted. Olive trees live hundreds and hundreds of years, and they have some of the oldest olive trees in Italy, and that's because until fairly recently, last 50 years, Italy was not an olive oil country. So, people used olive oil, of course, but it was not cheap, and it was not as prolific as it is now. So the thing that all these cuisines, after I read this book carefully and looked at all, there's only about 100 or so recipes. What do they all have in common is beans and greens. All these long-lived people use beans as a main source of protein, and fiber, by the way, is very important in your diet. And they eat a lot of greens, including a lot of cruciferous vegetables, meaning cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli. At the moment, I'm into a Brussels sprouts moment myself. Kohlrabi, that's a kind of cabbage too, kohl. They eat a lot of these vegetables, a lot of greens of other kinds as well, and beans. So, of course, I've been on a low-carb diet for so long, I decided I was craving beans more than anything. I've eaten some bread here and there, but I haven't, and I put some beans in my chili, which is relatively keto-friendly, but I have not eaten beans because for their own sake. I haven't had hummus in 2 years. I'm not making hummus, but I did make. I had to make some keto forbidden soup with chickpeas and carrots. I bought some carrots recently. I don't usually keep them in the house, but I need to use a carrot here and there. So I bought a few carrots and I just used them up in this soup. And I must say the soup came out sensationally, and it's totally vegan. So Dan Buettner would be very happy with me that he got to me. I'm not becoming vegan, but I already eat a lot of the way that these long-lived people eat. The problem is I don't do all the other things. Like walking is really important. All these communities are walkable communities that people, in the middle of the day, they go to the shopping or they visit their friends. By the way, friends are super important, meaning socializing is super important. In some of these communities, they live in extended family situations, so grandchildren grow up with their grandparents, maybe even great-grandparents, and everybody eats together. It's a way of life more than it is the way they eat, but as much the way they eat. So speaking of the way they eat, I'm going to give you the soup I made the other day in a second, but I always think about this. When I'm with my friends in Salerno, they eat everything. I've got to start off by saying they eat everything. But they also eat, I'm not joking, broccoli almost every day. Broccoli rabe. Cooked in many different ways. And whenever I say this, I think of my friend Laura, who looks 60 at age 85. we were at a pizzeria. This is a number of years ago, and everybody ordered whatever they ordered, and she ordered an escarole calzone, but then didn't eat the calzone part and only ate the broccoli inside. And I said, well, why are you only eating the broccoli? And she said, well, I like the bread part too, but I have to fit into a dress in a few weeks, so I'm being careful about the carbs. But with broccoli, it was like her sustenance food. And so anyway, here's what I did with to make this beans and greens soup. Chickpeas, by the way, are if you're watching your carbohydrates, chickpeas and lentils are the best legumes to eat. So this was going to be a chickpea soup, but it ended up to be a real vegetable soup. I actually had a little over a cup each of diced celery, diced onion, and diced carrot. And I did not make it small pieces. I would say they were at least 1/4 inch cubes. I mean, everything the same size. I put them in a pot with got to be 2 or 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and I sautéed them for 5 or 6 minutes. It didn't have to get soft. I just wanted them to turn in the oil, in the hot oil, for a while. And then I threw in a bunch, not a very big bunch, of what Italians call cavolo nero, a black cabbage, but it's actually kale. It's that dark green, dark green, long kale. Has different names. I'm trying to think of what they called it in my market the other day. Dragon kale. It has different names. It's the kale that Tuscan kale is a word I've seen around because it is an important leafy green in Tuscany, like broccoli is in Naples and Salerno. Anyway, so I had a bunch of that. I washed it, cut off the ends of the stems, but the stems are good too. So I cut it into crosswise 1/2 inch pieces, threw that in the pot with the vegetables, stirred that around for a few minutes. Then I put in a small can, 14, I think they're 14 ounce these days, can of Italian peeled plum tomatoes, which I crushed a bit when I put them in the pot. And then I covered it with enough water to just sort of cover everything by 1/2 inch or so. And I let it, and salt and pepper. And I let it roll for about a 1/2 hour, simmering. I think at some point I had to add a little bit more water. It depends on your taste. We like a bowl of vegetables as more than just soup. But this does come out with incredible broth, even though there's not a speck of chicken broth in there. There's no meat. I was considering starting this with pancetta, and then I said, now let's see if we can do a vegan version. Anyway, at the very end, after about a 1/2 an hour, I threw in a can of chickpeas with the liquid from the can. If you're vegan, by the way, now I'm forgetting the word, but there's a word for the liquid, and you eat the liquid, believe me. There's a lot of nutrition in the liquid in the can. It's not too salty at all. I ended up adding salt. And then you let the chickpea simmer in the soup for 15 minutes. Or after 15 minutes, you can turn off the heat and then reheat it later. It's even better. And we didn't even put cheese on it. I was considering offering Parmigiano, and Bob said it doesn't need it. It really was a delicious sweet broth. Maybe part of the secret here is that we haven't eaten carrots in a long time, and I think I've forgotten how sweet carrots are. So anyway, very good soup. I got my beans and my greens, and because of course, Ancel Keys, the man who came up with the idea of the Mediterranean diet, was the creator of K-rations. I don't think they were called K-rations after him. I'm forgetting why they were called K. I like to think of it was because of him. And K-rations, as I'm sure most listeners will know, was the food that we fed the troops during World War II. Dehydrated, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I read this cookbook pretty thoroughly, I got to say, and there are some really good recipes in it. By the way, there is a current paperback edition of this book, The Benevolent Bean, by Ancel Keys and his wife Margaret. I have a hunch it was really by Margaret with Ansel Keys' name on it so that they could sell it. But, I mean, she seems to know a lot. It's worth reading the history, the proteins, about proteins and legumes, and all the introductory material is wonderful. The recipes that are not, some of them are Margaret's, and I think those are probably the least interesting, because this was 1967, when 1 clove of garlic shocked people, like Jill Goodman.
Well, it still shocks her.
It's still a shocker to her, I know. So Mrs. Keys was very, very frugal, I should say, with garlic, except, this I thought was so interesting, the least nutritious thing I could think of to do with beans is to make cassoulet, because there's so much meat and so much other fat in it, sausage, I mean, it's really a heavy dish. She has a whole chapter on cassoulet, and the recipes, not hers, are from very famous either French chefs or French food writers. So if cassoulet interests you, it did at one time. It still interests me, but I'm not making it right now. But I have made good cassoulet. And by the way, you can buy the proper cassoulet beans, tarbis beans, online from what's his name? The bean guy. Anyway, you look up tarbis beans, and you can make good. And also, D'Artagnan sells a whole kit with all the meats and everything to make a cassoulet. But I remember going to France when I was young and going from town to town, Toulouse, Castelnaudary, or the various towns that were known for cassoulet, so I could taste the different cassoulets. But anyway, so those recipes are very interesting and probably worth making. But then, if it only has 1 clove of garlic, it's the equivalent of the Adventists using garlic powder and onion powder instead of real onion and real garlic. Anyway, so it's very interesting. Mediterranean diet. It's making me think, and Bob sort of agrees with this, that it's time for us to transition back to a moderate amount of carbohydrates. And beans are the way to go. I have eaten bread, and I have eaten some noodles, and I have eaten some rice here and there, but I think I'm going to go back to the Mediterranean diet, which is a sensible diet, as Ansel, and one of the longevity diets. But the diet that I used to go on when I wanted to lose weight was based on the Mediterranean diet, and it's calorie controlled Mediterranean diet, which is to say a lot of vegetables, some beans, and in the case of the Southern Italian Mediterranean diet, pasta, and not whole wheat pasta, but enough vegetables and stuff that's good for you put on the pasta. Not that pasta is bad for you. And it's, by the way, a very limited amount of pasta. A small amount of meat each week, fish, poultry, basically everything. But if you're doing calorie controlled, you have to be very careful about your fat, because even if it's just olive oil. And the what I used to call I still call the pasta lovers diet. I made up that name. It comes from my friends in Salerno who went to a nutritionist and got this diet. I've sort of updated the diet a little bit to put more whole grains in, but otherwise it's the same. By the way, some of our listeners have gone on this diet because I've sent it to them on request, and I'm happy to send it out on request. As I say, it's a calorie-controlled Mediterranean diet, and you do get to eat dairy, cheese, and you get to eat eggs. You get to eat everything, which is not, except not a lot of fruit. But you can still have 2 or 3 pieces of fruit a day. Oh, by the way, since today is Valentine's Day, happy Valentine's Day, if you happen to be going shopping for strawberries, I want you on alert that there are sensational strawberries being shipped up from Florida. Of course, where else in February would you get strawberries from. But I bought a box last week because they smelled good, and they were very inexpensive. And I thought, all right, I haven't had a strawberry in a long time. It's actually the best fruit if you're dieting, or let's say if you're watching calories or fiber or carbohydrates. But they were so good, I had to go back to the store and buy several pints more. And then by the time I got back to the store, the strawberries were coming from Mexico. So you have to look carefully on the box. The Mexican ones could be good for all I know, the ones that are coming up right now. But, by the way, you have heard, Marshall, that there are no avocados coming from Mexico. We're boycotting Mexican avocados, which is to say we're boycotting avocados.
Yeah, yes, I did hear. And it's funny because on the Super Bowl yesterday, Mexican avocado had a couple of commercials.
Well, not only that, but it was the third, I saw this data somewhere, it was the third most popular food for Super Bowl. Okay. Number one was chicken wings, by far. Number two was pizza. Number three was a guacamole or other kind of, that 7-layer dip with chips to scoop it up with. And I forget what the fourth was, but the fifth, the lowest, was chili. Used to be a chili day Super Bowl. No longer. Only 5% of Super Bowl parties serve chili. Hot dogs, I think, were in there, too. Maybe that was number 4.
It's not fancy enough anymore.
Well, chicken wings have gone up dramatically in price, not on Super Bowl, because they've become so popular. And a friend yesterday said to me, so what are they doing with the rest of the chickens? Well, breasts have been popular for a long time. Then came thighs only. And so I think wings are having their turn now. And by the way, I buy backs because I use them to make chicken broth. But all the chicken gets used up one way or the other. But the wings have gone up way up in price just normally, and then they went up even more for Super Bowl because supply and demand.
Yep, absolutely. All right.
Steve Santo, that's the name of the guy, the bean man. They have every bean, heirloom beans. They have great beans. And one of the things that I love about their beans is that we know that they're harvested within a few months of when you're buying them dry. It's a fallacy that dried beans last forever. Eventually, they get so dry that they never really reconstitute well. They may get edible, but they're not going to be creamy. If they're creamy beans, they're going to be granular, and blah, blah. Anyway, so you should use your dried beans within a year. And lentils, I think, last a little longer than that. I'm trying to use up some canned. I have no objection to canned beans, really. If that encourages you to eat beans more frequently, by all means, open up a can of beans and do something with it. But don't throw away the liquid. Don't drain the beans.
Oh, the liquid's great as a thickener and everything else.
Unless you're making a bean salad, then I'll let you drain the beans.
Right, all right.
You could even rinse them in that case.
All right. Good to speak to you again, Arthur.
Beans and greens. Eat more beans and greens. Goodbye. Have a great week, a great and healthy week.
Okay, we'll speak to you next week, Arthur. Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven, here on The Breakfast Club on Robin Hood Radio. Underwriting support for Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven, Hillsdale Home Chef. More information, 518-325-7000, hgshomechef.com.